This is episode 377 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, we are within approximately 2 full days, 48 hours of the New Mexico legislative session hurtling to a close. And as is almost always the case with legislative sessions, it is chaotic. There is a lot going on, some of it even good, I suppose, and a lot of it bad. And we're just going to try to survive until next week when the dust will settle a little bit and we'll have a better idea of what wound up happening. So we're going to do our best to be factual and timely, but things are moving very quickly in Santa Fe.
Yeah, I think for a 30-day session, Paul, this may be the most chaotic that I've ever seen. You know, two sessions ago in the 30-day session, we were kind of some COVID things and a lot of things happened, but it seemed like things were greased. There was a lot of initiatives brought forth at the beginning, and not a lot of them have been followed through on. But as they say, it is never over till it's over, and a lot of times things happen in the last day or two, and sometimes even into the last morning. So it won't be over until Thursday morning at noon, and we'll see if more things, good or bad, get passed here by this legislature in 2022.
Yeah, and one of the curveballs, if you will, that hit really yesterday morning, it must have been Sunday night, though, when this all went down, when Representative Georgene Louis was arrested for a DUI. They're calling it aggravated. They're saying that she was driving her car 17 miles an hour over the speed limit on St. Francis. She was booked into jail, and it was because she had a .17 blood alcohol content, twice the legal limit. So a lot of issues there. This is another instance, let's be clear, of Democrat legislators behaving badly. Of course, there was a Republican a few years ago that had a DWI. And this one, though, is new. It is the chair of a powerful committee. In fact, it had a big role in pushing a piece of legislation off for at least 24 hours. The House Government Elections and Indian Affairs Committee was supposed to hear SB 14, one of the worst bills that we've laid out this session. SB 14 is the Clean Fuel Standard. I tuned into the committee hearing yesterday, what was supposed to be in a Zoom meeting. It's a little different when you're not in the roundhouse, but there was crickets. There was a Zoom and nothing was happening. And I was wondering, what the heck's going on here? Why is this committee supposed to convene at 8:30 a.m. on Monday morning not convening? And then I looked at Twitter and saw a report from Dan Boyd at the Journal saying, well, Georgene Louis got picked up on a DWI and the committee will not happen this morning.
Wow, yeah, that's, committees are not always the best at starting on time under the best of circumstances, but yes, very tragic situation. You know, it's one of those things, a lot of alcoholism in New Mexico, and we've made progress amongst the populace for DWI, but it certainly hasn't gone away, and our political leaders are... they should be aware of it. They talk about it all the time, and the stakes are particularly high for them. But just another sad case. So we'll see how all of this turns out. It's always interesting on these sorts of things, the politics that play. So it's if this were a Republican, we know we would already be hearing for calls for resignation. I'm not saying they haven't happened from the Republicans going the other way, but they've been pretty quiet as far as I can tell. At least I haven't seen it in a big way, but hope at a minimum she addresses her problem from a personal point of view, because it's not good, and certainly not good from a legislature in the middle of a legislative session.
Yeah, and time will tell as to the impact this has on Representative Louis. Of course, we had the Cheryl Williams Stapleton issue, which was much more malevolent from a financial and impact on the state of New Mexico and its children perspective, but another scandal impacting a Democrat in the legislature cannot be good for them. It's not good for the body, etc. So, and we'll see what happens to the legislation. We're certainly hoping SB 14 clean fuel standard. That's the ethanol and all the junk they want to put in your gas tank. It's a cap and trade system. A lot of bad things in there. Hopefully that helps kill that particular bill. But you never know. They have a tendency to, if they want something bad enough, ram things through. But boy, we're going to talk about later on in the show the gas prices. You cannot come up with a less opportune time to raise those gas prices. But before we get to that, of course, we've got some COVID-related news to talk about there, Wally. The Super Bowl happened over the weekend in lockdown Los Angeles, California. But boy, you wouldn't have seen any mask wearing. You had to look pretty darn hard to find a mask. And this is after the health department out there in LA sent out a notice after the governor and numerous others were all partying at the last Super Bowl that they indicated that there was going to be a push for masks to be worn in the stadium unless you're eating or drinking at that moment.
Well, everyone was eating and drinking at all or not everyone. 99.9% were eating and drinking at all moments because Paul, I didn't look closely during the game. I was just watching the game, and a lot of times they don't show the crowd, but I didn't see mask one during the game that I noticed again.
No.
And the other issue that I saw that shows that masks may be over, in the past, there's been more masks on commercials. Yep. Very few. I saw a couple of masks, but it's like masks are done. Long live the mask. We'll have to see how that works out in New Mexico. But in Los Angeles for that day, there were the mask mandate. If that was a push, I'd hate to see what it would look like without a push because no one wore them. So.
Yeah, and I'm just reading from an article. LA County officials urge caution for Super Bowl gatherings as coronavirus cases continue to drop. This is from February the 12th, Los Angeles Times. And, they cite the data showing that, like everywhere else, the Omicron variant is going down, and they get the usual fear-mongering folks and data in there, and they talk about how the health department says that all folks entering the stadium must provide proof of vaccination or negative test, and that they must wear masks at all times except when eating or drinking. And it really made it sound like there was going to be a serious effort around this. 70,000 people, though, gathered at what I guess can be called a quasi-indoor stadium. I guess it's not a complete enclosed building. I understand this is a new stadium. It's quite a structure, so indoor, outdoor is not always a firm distinction on these stadiums, but everybody looked like they were having a good time. A lot of Hollywood A-listers out there, and of course, the real, I think, as a parent, as a New Mexican, obviously we know that New Mexico, our governor, is even more locked down across the board than California, which is nothing short of stunning, but. Monday morning after the Super Bowl, kids watching this all on TV, probably hanging out at a Super Bowl party with their family unmasked, and then they have to wear the mask for 7 or 8 hours a day. And you talk about a generation that I hope when they are older realizes who specifically, not generally, because certainly a lot of adults do not believe what these policies are helpful or that it's right to put kids in masks while you go party without a mask on, etc. But I hope these kids have a healthy sense of distrust of authority, and same in New Mexico because yes, while New Mexico is a different state, we have followed in many respects the California model under this governor and are it's still more locked down than any other state with the exception of Hawaii and Washington. So it's really incredible and mind-blowing the mental gymnastics that some of these people have. And yeah, if the mask is really going to save you, if it's going to make a difference, then you've really got to do that and make it a consistent thing and make sure that everybody, especially the people who are supposed to be the role models, the governor and the mayor at this Super Bowl, Garcetti in LA was at the game, unmasked, hanging out, talking. It's either a serious issue or it's not. And our children, I think, have every right to be outraged. Maybe not yet, but certainly in the future, when they realize what has been done to them in their generation, I hope that they have a very healthy suspicion of government authority.
Yeah, this mask thing is weird. And Paul, it's going to be interesting. There are people that I think will, there's this thing called long COVID amongst a certain small percentage of people that goes on for a long period of time. I have a feeling once mask mandates are gone, we're going to see long maskers, people that just can't get away from them, that have developed an emotional attachment. And, we've already seen now the data starting to come through about the lack of effectiveness of shutdowns with regard to deaths among COVID. It's one of those things. The data, the control group is what's always very difficult to come up with something like this. But, the vaccine didn't do much to slow COVID down. If anything, it maybe delayed it inevitably. Mask maybe didn't do anything. Social distance didn't do anything. But boy, there are a lot of costs to be paid for those policies, and we're starting to see that. The other good thing about masks in children or not wearing masks in children are, COVID is one of those things. A young, healthy immune system is very, very effective against COVID and the issues. If you're a immune compromised person that's in their 70s, 80s, or 90s with multiple health issues, maybe a different story. But, a 5, 6, 7-year-old, 10-year-old going to school, running around with their friends. And Paul, make no mistake, they get together and don't have masks on a good portion of the day with their friends anyway. But to have to wear them at school and all the communication and other issues that these cause, seems like hopefully we'll be getting to the end of that, even here in New Mexico. Although Dr. Scray still likes the mask. He likes them, so.
Yeah, and he's not the only one. It's noteworthy that the CDC has continued to push masks and say that they should be worn regardless of vaccination status. Now, I could go through, and maybe we will at another time when we don't have so much legislative stuff to talk about, but the CDC and these health bureaucracies are notorious for their adherence to the precautionary principle that, basically the CDC, if you really let them set recommendations for people, they would probably say we should not ride around in automobiles or that the speed limit should be 20 across the board because they focus on one thing and one thing only, not, gee, I have places to go, I'm trying to lead a busy life, and there may be a little more risk involved in that. But the fact is that blue states outside of New Mexico and Washington and Hawaii have really decided that for whatever reason, whether it's purely politics or whether they have suddenly seen some scientific light, have decided that it's time to change their mask policies. So the universal indoor mask mandate, ironically in California, ends today, the 15th of February, while the school indoor mask mandate remains in place. Connecticut, the 28th of February is when they end everything. Delaware, February 11th, they ended the universal indoor mask mandate, but kids remain in masks through March 31st. And I think that this is the worst policy, is to keep masking kids while everybody else gets unmasked. But Illinois, 28th, universal indoor, but schools remain in masks. Massachusetts, schools on the 28th of February. Nevada, everything went away on the 10th for both groups. New Jersey, schools expire on March 7th. New York, the universal mask mandate indoors expired on the 10th, but kids remain in masks. If you can, you're paying a lot of taxes, and if you have kids in New York or one of these other states, boy, on principle, I would be looking for a place to live. Oregon, which Kate Brown has been right up there with Michelle Lujan Grisham. To be fair, none of their mask mandates are going away until March 31st. So we could easily, get through this next March 4th health order, and the governor could rescind it or let it expire, and boom, we could be mask free as quickly as then. So we could be in front of Oregon. Rhode Island, February the 11th for universal, March 4th for the kids. And in Washington, they've had a universal outdoor mask mandate, and that expires on a few days, the 18th, but everything else remains in effect. So this is from ABC News, and I believe it to be accurate as can be, but it just really, it's not totally shocking to me that, given the way she's behaved throughout the pandemic, Michelle Lujan Grisham remains the slowest of the blue state governors to act to change the policy. But it's not the way that I think most voters in New Mexico, if they'd said, is Michelle Lujan Grisham among the very most progressive governors in the entire country, I don't think I would have said that. And I know COVID is only one aspect of public policy, but it's the one that the governor has the most control over by herself. And it really, it shows, I think, her love of control over all of us.
Well, and that regulators, and make no mistake about it, public health officials are regulators. They like to have things to regulate. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen lockdowns have come and gone. Social distancing is come and gone. Believe me, look at the Super Bowl and tell me how much social distancing is there. The vaccines have largely played out, whether that was good, bad, or indifferent. The infection rates of the Omicron have been similar amongst, and now I do know, but it would have been much worse. Fine, that's fine. And now we're in masks. So I guess without masks, the public health officials would have to say what they have a very, very hard time saying is, we got nothing. It's like, go about your business. But I've seen explicitly certain governors have basically said exactly that. That's it. This is played out. Not that COVID is gone, and not that we're not going to have to deal with this, but from a large policy kind of shutdown, masks, social distancing, vaccine point of view, that those ships have all sailed. Their time has come and gone, and we're going to have to learn to live with this and deal with this. So we'll see if and when New Mexico gets to that. And Paul, as you know, this thing has still boomeranged a lot. Last year in 2021 in May, happy days were here again, and everything was done. We had vaccines that were going to protect us all, and then a year later, we're in a similar situation for infections. A lot of hospitalizations, still a relatively high number of deaths, but I think even New Mexico will get there for a few months, and we'll see what happens. The one thing I have definitely learned is this predicting what is going to happen, that particularly the end, has been a fool's errand to this point. So we'll see. We're just going to have to watch it play out real time.
Yeah, and now moving up to Santa Fe, a topic we love to discuss on Tipping Point, New Mexico, especially nowadays when the Albuquerque Journal is running repeated articles above the fold talking about stuff that we've been talking about for months, which is the fact that we may not have steady electricity come this summer around the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, maybe they'll adopt the personal generator index like we have on the show. Now in my estimation at 87.5 out of 100, unless something happens, we're gonna be facing some huge problems this coming year.
Yeah, and it's worth repeating, as we will every time we talk about this. The problems and the blackouts, the brownouts, everything that happens this summer is directly attributable to one law that was passed in 2019 called the Energy Transition Act. The fact that the media will not explicitly explain this, discuss this, is shocking and really illustrates why I think so many people have lost faith in the media. We're not talking ancient history. We're not talking about policies put into place 20, 30, 40 years ago that nobody knew at the time what they would do at the end of the day.
Yeah, this isn't the founding of the Environmental Protection Agency under
Yeah.
the Nixon administration. It's like this is really, really new. And it's called transition. We're in the earliest part of the
Right.
transition. We're already starting to feel a little bit like a big insect splatting into the windshield of an oncoming truck.
And legislation was introduced, or better to describe it as a dummy bill was commandeered, HB 220, which would have done some things. And this was a Republican-oriented bill. It really essentially died in its first committee or got tabled, which does give it the possibility of coming back. And then there was an attempt to blast this. Also, I think more to get the Democrats on the record than anything else. And as I understand it, or maybe one Democrat voted to remove it from the committee and have a discussion about it on the floor. Either way, HB 22 is kind of the long shot as it stands now effort to get past this summer and try to have steady electricity for the foreseeable future. Why don't you've worked on this issue. I testified on it in committee, but you've been handling a lot of utility-oriented things recently. Talk about what this effort entailed and if you think something like it will come about either legislatively or possibly more likely from the Public Regulation Commission.
Yeah,
June.
Yeah, so the big thing is that yes, we have COVID, and one of the things that COVID was very good at was disrupting supply chains in virtually every industry. But we're seeing that in these renewable projects, we're seeing it in battery projects, and P&M was very, very good at coming up with plans to turn off and get rid of assets that were not natural gas or renewable. San Juan Generating Station slated to close June of this year. P&M getting out of nuclear leases at Palo Verde. But their new renewable projects aren't coming online. And so what does that mean? That means we could be having a serious trouble. And so one of the things that was in this bill was extension of time to be able to comply with the Energy Transition Act, adding some period for that. Because even P&M's talking about needing that to keep the power on this year. Paul listened to the public meeting of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission last week, and they've got a case open right now that they're going to be doing some more inquiry in the coming weeks. It's NMPRC case 21-00159-UT, where right now they're trying to figure out what should they be asking the utilities and what actions should they be encouraging from the PRC. But one of the things that was striking to me was a commissioner during that public meeting said, the other thing is that if we're going to have this issue in the summer, meaning we're not going to get it solved, we need to start letting people know right now that blackouts and brownouts are a distinct possibility and they're coming. I thought that maybe even from a regulatory point of view, maybe a little early for that, But as you said, we've talked about this off and on for a couple of years now, and now the PRC is very much getting in the midst of it, as well as PNM. And then the other issue is there are no, and they talk a little bit about this in the open meeting. There used to be most states in most electric systems. Amongst the many players, there was some excess that you probably could count on when your own assets and resources weren't functioning really well. Well, from Arizona to Texas and New Mexico in between, that seems to not be the case anymore. So you much more have to stand on your own. It also means that when assets go down, if you have a power plant, whether it be San Juan or whether it be one of your gas-fired generators or some other disruption in your system happens during really heavy usage, you may be facing a very, very serious problem. And this is what we need to look at. So
now, this bill would have extended the lifetime of
compliance with the Energy Transition Act for 2 years. That's basically what it did. So you wouldn't have to comply with the lower standards. And they don't say San Juan Generating Station in the Energy Transition Act, which is like saying, Paul, this only applies to the Tipping Point, New Mexico host who has short hair on top and wears glasses during the show. We all know that's you. Well, they describe a coal-fired facility of so much capacity. Make no mistake, it's San Juan. That's the only power plant it applies to. And so, obviously, PNM's going to have to do something to rectify this situation, and maybe this extension is part of the solution. There's also the city of Farmington and Enchant Energy have a project that they're still working very hard on to extend the life of San Juan Generating Station by adding carbon capture facilities, and possibly Enchant Energy could be part of the solution with regard to San Juan going forward. But we'll have to wait and see if that bill passes, and if it doesn't, who's going to be making the call? And there's a lot of things that have to happen. There's the PRC. They control the utility aspect. You have the Environment Department that enforces the Energy Transition Act. And then you have the governor's office that can either make it all happen by making everybody work together and doing what's necessary, or stopping anything that she doesn't believe is, in her best political interest. So we have a lot of craziness going on right now. And
didn't it also deem natural gas to be renewable for purposes of the energy transition?
Combined cycle natural gas. Right. So and combined cycle is just like it says. You have single cycle natural gas. It's just a gas turbine that spins around, generates electricity. Combined cycle takes the waste heat from that initial turbine and powers another turbine. So it's like a much more complicated, but the amount of energy you get for any given amount of carbon dioxide that comes off from burning natural gas is well reduced. So that was in there as well. Okay. And that one could do a lot, but keep in mind again, it's not that. We're probably not going to get a lot of combined cycle power plants online by August of this year in the current supply. No, I'm just saying. So under a normal year, if this were normal times, and there was an emergency, I bet you'd be able to cobble together some more assets, more equipment to put something in place. Is that the case right now? It's iffy. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, stay tuned. More to hear about that. Of course, when you're sitting there this summer and either your electricity does come on and you are cool and comfortable and the lights are on, or when the alternative happens, you can't say we didn't warn you, certainly of that potential eventuality.
Yeah, Paul, I don't know if you were ever around when Ernie Mills was alive, and he did the Capitol Roundhouse reports, and he'd always say, "Don't say we didn't tell you," and that's what we're saying here. So
there you go. Well, speaking of energy, I don't know, Wally, how much driving you've been doing these days, but everybody out there driving is experiencing rapid increases in the price of gasoline. And, we don't necessarily blame individual politicians for complicated things that happen. Now, the Energy Transition Act, certainly the governor, the legislators who voted for it, they deserve blame for something that hasn't even happened yet, but very likely will. Gas prices, it's a very dynamic market involving a lot of different things. Russia and Ukraine have been a factor in this market, but there is no doubt that the Biden administration and its broader inflationary policies, but also its anti-energy policies, have done a lot to increase the price of gasoline. And right now, if you drive down the street in most parts of Albuquerque, most gas stations are selling for on the order of $3.50 a gallon, which is extremely high, especially for the wintertime. That's a summertime price potentially these days when you get new fuel blends going, when you have higher demand, people out driving. But for the winter to be at $3.50 more or less a gallon, it has gotten really high in recent weeks and months, and it's going to leave a mark on people's pocketbooks.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And Paul, we have a oil price in this country now, as we're doing this podcast, in the low 90s, $92 and some change per barrel. So the oil price is pretty high. We also have the winter-summer switchover of refineries that produce natural gas, and we are not even there yet. So there's no matter what the price of oil is, and then long term the price of gasoline extremely well tracks the price of oil. That's not a big surprise, but there's some delays, and sometimes there's gasoline stores are saved up, so an oil price increase doesn't flow through as quickly. But yeah, we could be looking at another at the oil price we're at now. Here in a couple months is that summer winter switchover happens, we could see higher prices. The way I noticed it, Paul, is in addition to seeing things driving down the street, I needed to fill up, and I fill up at a warehouse store that sells gas out in front of it. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. That's not Costco. So anyway, I drove by on a Thursday, and it was packed, and I drove by Friday, and it was even worse. And I was getting, the point where I really needed to fill up. I finally went back. It was crowded again. Well, the price there at these pumps were a good 40 cents below. So, it's one of those, they're using that as a loss leader and then some, but it's not a surprise. A lot of times the price at these warehouses are, in more stable, steady times can be just a few cents lower than a regular gas station. But, people were doing it, and make no mistake, if you have 50 cents difference or 40 or 50 cents difference in price of gasoline, we're talking enough money that it's definitely worth people's while. But yeah, gasoline prices high, and keep in mind we're having huge inflationary pressures, and there's no ducking the price of diesel fuel or gasoline in the economy, because everything has to be moved by one of those commodities or another that's a product to get to you. So just another inflationary pressure going on. And then if we had to add that, 50 cents or whatever it would be for these New Mexico laws, we could be seeing $4 gas prices here in New Mexico pretty easily.
Yeah, when Biden took office back in January of 2021, we were about $2.25 a gallon. Immediately, he enacted some policies, including the moratorium on permitting on federal lands impacting New Mexico. We talked about that, the Keystone XL pipeline. But he's enacted a number of other plans that could be qualified as anti-energy. And the folks at Americans for Prosperity actually provided a list of 25 Biden administration policies that are raising energy costs. And a lot of those, of course, have to do with oil and gas, everything from rejoining the Paris Agreement to raising prices on cars and trucks and other various policies. I provided a link to it in a post about gas prices at heirsoфenchantment.com. Go check that out. Speaking of energy again, our own Attorney General, Hector Balderas, it's as if he doesn't even know his state exists and what it does, but Hector Balderas signed a brief in a case involving Berkeley, California, which is probably the most liberal state in the entire U.S. of A. They are...
Yeah, the most liberal town in the most liberal state.
Yeah, they have a law in the books there that prohibits new building construction, whether that is a home or a condo or a restaurant, for example, a business, from having natural gas hookups to use to heat or cook. And restaurants don't like that very much, as you might imagine. And the restaurant industry in California, the association has filed a lawsuit to stop, to throw out Berkeley's law. And this is in the court system now. And we're at the stage where you're getting your friends on either side. You get the amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs, which unfortunately, the cat out of the bag, so to speak, Hector Balderas saw fit to file an amicus brief on the side of Berkeley against natural gas in your home and in support of this bizarre and horrible law, which is going to have massive negative repercussions. Maybe not in a mild climate like Berkeley, but if you have cold temperatures and your electricity goes out for any reason, whether it's just a shortage of supply or it might be a severe storm and icing or something, and suddenly you don't have electricity, that gas is critical. But for the restaurants, they want their members, their restaurants across the state of California, to be able to cook on natural gas, which apparently does a much better job in cooking the food than a electricity oriented range. So I think it's just the latest case here, though, Wally, of a New Mexico elected politician who represents not the state of New Mexico, not our interests, but whoever is funding his campaigns, the radical environmental groups that support those campaigns. He and Martin Heinrich, of course, the U.S. Senator, who's been pushing this issue for some time. It's just amazing that some politicians from natural gas producing New Mexico would be pushing this kind of policy.
Yeah, and Paul, I've mentioned this before, but here's the key is that right now, including California, they use massive amounts of electricity generation that's generated by natural gas. And so if you're using natural gas in your home, you're using it for one to two things, and both are heat oriented. You're using it to heat your home, heat water or your home, or to cook, which is it's a source of heat. The amount of natural gas that's necessary to heat your home is far less than the amount of natural gas that's necessary to produce the electricity that then needs to be generated and transmitted and distributed to your home to do the same thing.
And we talked about a while back how the governor had signed legislation to deem natural gas as a green source of energy because they were having trouble keeping their lights on. So they kind of shoehorned natural gas in as a zero carbon form of electricity.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of those things that, and who knows, but a lot of downstream energy policy is driven by what seems to me to be the fanciful thought that wind and solar and batteries are going to be, 100% of the energy requirement of the United States on the electricity side in the near future. I think it's not going to be. There's lots of huge issues with that we're seeing. And, there's maybe nuclear would be the case if that's, it might be up to the challenge. But, that's not an overnight solution, believe me, with the regulations that the nuclear industry will have to jump through. So we're proceeding from a false premise, and the same thing with electric cars. So, yeah, our electric cars do they produce emissions at the source of use? The answer is no. But if you're using natural gas and coal and to make the electricity, it's not like there is a free lunch here. And this is an extreme example because it is so efficient, and the furnaces are way more efficient than they even were a couple of decades ago in homes. And this seems like it's at some level an anti-environmental push based under the false premise of wind, solar, and batteries are the way it's going to be in massive percentages of numbers, and it's just not turning out to be the case anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. New Mexico is a top 10 producer of natural gas. The leading state is Texas, but unlike oil, you get some different names towards the top of the list. Like Pennsylvania is right up there with Texas on natural gas production, and I know they've had their shale play.
Yeah, their Marcellus Shale, which is a natural gas shale play. So
yeah, so that's changed that market abruptly, but it's made natural gas more plentiful, and of course, it is a very green source of electricity. Someday we can go into maybe natural gas more deeply as a specific energy source, but New Mexico is one of the leading states in that field. As we hit that end of the 30-day legislative session, we mentioned a few bills. SB 14, that's the clean fuel standard. HB 6, the net zero, that's still very much in play. HB 132, the arbitrary cap on interest rates, also moving. SB 8, after numerous amendments and different versions, just the Democrats didn't have an agreement among themselves on SB 8 and what they wanted to do. So they may blame the Republicans somehow for preventing this voting bill from being the law of the land, but they had two different versions of the bill before it was even heard in its first committee. Numerous amendments were made. The bill had all kinds of craziness at the very beginning. SB 8 does look at this point like it may be dead. Now, on the good side of things, there is a tax reduction bill. It doesn't look like the Social Security tax is going to be completely eliminated, but it's going to be the limit's going to be raised. You're going to see a gross receipts tax reduction, a modest reduction in the rate. That's worthy of happening. We're happy about that. There's going to be some tax credits, and some of this is going to be more kind of social welfare than tax reduction. But those are some of the things that have made their way into this omnibus bill. And it does look like something is going to pass. We'll see what the final shape of that bill looks like and if it actually gets to the finish line. But I'm confident the governor will promote that and crow about that. But yeah, it's something that's been generated by the fact that we have so much of this oil and gas money flowing into the state. I wouldn't say that anything in that bill, anything done during the session, is going to improve the economic diversity, either in the short or long term, of the state of New Mexico. But having government, grow by 13.5% and providing a small tax relief to the citizens of New Mexico, they could spend all of it, and they're not doing that. But it's certainly not what we would like to see happen. And we'll see what ultimately does happen. We'll on next podcast have a lot more detail on that.
Yeah, we try to avoid the rumor mill, but there is talk out there amongst the political class that possibly a special session may be in order. I couldn't tell you which bills would have to not get through for the governor to call that, but it is being talked about. And it's like the sequel to a horror movie. Just when you thought it was safe to go back about your business because the legislature wasn't in session, will there be a special session to deal with things that don't get done? We'll have to wait and see on that one. Hopefully, they will get their work done and go home. Paul, the other issue on that is people say, "Oh, we need a paid legislature." Oh my goodness! Can you imagine if we were like some states where the legislature was in session, 6, 9, 10 months a year? How many laws we would have, and how much damage could be done? It makes me cringe.
Yeah, and there are arguments to reforming the legislature, but it's not the 30-day session. It's not the unpaid aspect that really causes problems. It's the fact that we elect a bunch of people who don't know their policy head from a hole in the ground, and that causes the issues. And I should mention that while it's not the centerpiece of the Rio Grande Foundation's efforts, especially with some of these police-oriented shootings that have happened around the Albuquerque area recently, the governor did make a push for some of these crime bills and very much wanted to see them pass the legislature. That is something that we will be watching as well because it's important news, and that may be something that the governor calls a special session for. Well, who knows? You can track all of the gory details at the Rio Grande Foundation's Freedom Index, where we rate all the bills that get a vote on the floor of either house at the Rio Grande Foundation.org website. And you can find out how your specific legislators are voting. Do they have a positive pro-liberty score, or are they voting for bigger government and less individual freedom? You can go to RioGrandeFoundation.org, click on Freedom Index, and find that out. Now, we haven't, because of the rise of the legislative session, talked as much about what is going on at Albuquerque City Council, but you can tell that a new day has dawned to an extent, and I say that to an extent because just the very fact that things are coming up for discussion mean that there is a new approach at Albuquerque City Council. I know we're short on time, but here are a few things that were discussed at the Finance Committee hearing. So these are moving their way through the process and could be considered before the full City Council. And we testified on a few of these at a public meeting, again on Zoom on Monday afternoon. 0-22-3, or O, I believe, not 0, O, the letter, would repeal the city's ban on plastic bags. That's a worthwhile approach. That's Brooke Bassan, councilor. O-22-1. Now, Dan Lewis had originally been talking about a significant gross receipts tax cut, repealing the 3/8 GRT increase that had been passed in 2018. It looks like there must not have been support among the broad council, and the mayor has opposed this. So there was an effort to get a 1/8 cent tax reduction and also dedicate more of those dollars to public safety. Again, these are ideas and concepts. What actually comes out of the city council is anybody's guess. Repealing emergency powers of the mayor in a COVID-style emergency. Not all of them, but certainly some of them. Shutting down city streets, mass assemblies, churches, closing of private businesses. Those were some of the things that Councilor Lewis had targeted. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like this one's going to get very far, but you never know. Again, just the fact that it's being discussed is worthwhile as 0-22-3. And these are all just the bill numbers. You can go to the cabq.gov website. And prohibiting a vaccine mandate. City Council pushing back against the mayor. That's R-22-2. You can go to the arrowsoфenchantment.com website and find this information and weigh in directly with your city councilors if you live in the Duke City. But that is a far cry agenda-wise from where we were just before the last election, and a lot of good policies that hopefully one or all of these will make their way through the process in the not too distant future. So we will certainly be keeping you all apprised of them, because as Albuquerque goes, so does so much of New Mexico.
Yeah, and as you say, just over the past several years, it would be unthinkable to have an agenda of bills, ordinances like the one you just did. Big change.
Yeah, so we will see you all next week after the session, and that is going to be an interesting 48 hours. Wally will we'll see what shakes loose between now and then, hoping for the best and praying for the best, but understanding that when the legislature is in session, your property and home is not safe from the government, and anything can happen in this legislature. So stay tuned, and if you want to follow us in the hour by hour process with these bills, follow us on Twitter at PGESSING, at PGuessing, or at Rio Grande FNDN. And that's a good way to follow us. Even the email situation, it's tough to sometimes get timely email messages out to our folks, but if something comes up, we definitely will on that. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube and Rumble channels. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.